we have a guest, a very important guest, who flew here all the way from South Africa with a great mission. And please welcome the chairman of Nelson Mandela Foundation, President Ndebele.
Well, I'm the one that's standing between you and your comfortable beds. And I'd really like to greet you all a wonderful evening, and to take this opportunity to thank the Atlantic Foundation, Mustafa, for inviting me to come all this way, flying for over 20 hours from Cape Town to get here. I want to tell you that it was absolutely worthwhile. I'm traveling with Ayhan of the Turquoise Foundation in South Africa. And I had no idea when he was telling me about the different organizations of that nature that have spread around the world from Turkey. And I didn't really have a sense of the extensiveness of it and the massiveness of it. And also the enormous generosity of all the people that are involved in taking education to the rest of the world, just for the love of educating young people and being in touch with them and opening the doors of perception to the world. It's an extraordinary experience that I'm so grateful that I have been able to experience this coming here as a result of the invitation. And also, I have to say that it was such a tremendous experience to be in that induction the other day. And thank you, Dean Carter. I remember very vividly, I will take these memories with me back to South Africa. Your deep knowledge of your work, and also the infectious enthusiasm and dedication that you bring to your work. It was certainly a highlight, one of the highlights of my visit. And thank you very much for the good work that you do at the Martin Luther King Jr. Chapel. Thank you very much. And a wonderful experience also to have listened to all the different presentations. I had no questions because I was absorbing so much. And it's clearly the very first time that I've ever attended a gathering of this nature, where people who believe in the world, in peace and justice, who carry their different religious perspectives with them, in one room, talking about how to change the world in significant ways. It is a tremendous experience that I will treasure for the rest of my life. I was asked to talk a little bit about the work of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and I will do that briefly, but hopefully be able to give a little bit of a picture of what the foundation does. I bring to the foundation, having been appointed into this job about 3 years ago, some three decades of leadership in higher education, having been president of various South African universities over the years. I also bring into this job the sensibilities of a writer, of fiction and poetry and of essays. So if you want to have a little bit about who's this person who chairs the Nelson Mandela Foundation, he's also written a very interesting novel called The Cry of Winnie Mandela, about this fierce woman who has done so much for South Africa. And when the novel got published, she unexpectedly came to the launch of the book, and I said to her, "Have you read this book?" And she said, "No, I didn't read it." And of course, I didn't believe her. But that is the experience I bring to this job. Nelson Mandela established 3 legacy organizations. The first one is called the Nelson Mandela Children's Trust, and its big project at the moment is to build a children's hospital. Once this hospital has been built in Johannesburg, it will be the second one that serves children from across the entire continent of Africa. The first one is called the Red Cross Hospital, and this is based in Cape Town. So you may have heard from time to time when there are children from Ethiopia or whatever who have serious medical problems, they have had to be flown all the way to Cape Town to be cared for. This hospital facility will be the second one, and they just broke the ground not too long ago to start the work of building. The second foundation that Nelson Mandela, legacy organization that Mandela established, is called, it goes by a very interesting name, the Mandela Rhodes Foundation. Now, if you can bring Mandela and Cecil John Rhodes into the same room, you have an explosive situation. Cecil John Rhodes is known as having been one of the most entrepreneurial, but also very brutal capitalists that we have ever had down south there. And Nelson Mandela, knowing this, said, "I would like to bring my name and the name of Cecil John Rhodes together, because he brings to the task of history enormous entrepreneurship and the dedication to education." We all know that Cecil John Rhodes established the Rhodes Trust, with many Americans, for example, who have become Rhodes Scholars, including none other than Bill Clinton, who went to Oxford to get an education. All that money came out of the gold and diamond mines of South Africa, but all the way to Oxford, and not a cent on our continent. That is what Nelson Mandela wanted to put right. He said, "I want to put these 2 names together, but I would like that we must train the new generation, high-level generation of African leaders on the African continent." And this is on that score that the Rhodes Trust donated £20 million to start that organization in Cape Town in South Africa. To date, we have succeeded to raise an endowment of over R500 million, which assures this scholarship into perpetuity for many, many years to come. To date, we have educated some 200 young South Africans from 17 different African countries. And the endowment is in a good shape to get new leaders coming up to run the continent of Africa well into the foreseeable future. The third one is, of course, the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Perhaps the only way I can capture very briefly the essence of the foundation is to tell a story of which has been captured for posterity. Imagine that the Nelson Mandela has been released. Imagine that the work of having the first democratic elections is underway. But it's difficult, and nobody is sure that we're going to ever have those elections. And Nelson Mandela has this idea that the most unpredictable part of this change will be the South African Defence Force. Imagine him in a room with 6 generals of the South African Defence Force. And these people are battle-hardened individuals who have terrorized the entire Southern African continent to submission. Mozambique, Swaziland, South Africa, Angola, Namibia, all of them terrified that they will be attacked by the South African Defence Force because of their support for their anti-apartheid activities. Those are the people then who, at that precise moment when we were trying to get this election, historic election going, who stand in the way. This is what Nelson Mandela is reported to have said to them. He said, "You have the greatest army this continent has ever seen. You can bomb and shoot us many times over. But there's 2 things on our side. First, we are too many. You won't finish us off. But secondly, we have the international community, family on our side." And that was the case. Then he put it to them, therefore, that given that scenario, why don't we agree that all of us have lost this war, but then all of us have a future to win? And that is precisely what happened. All the generals agreed to stand behind the transition, the negotiated process that led to the election that took place on the 27th of April of 1994. An historic occasion that each and every one of us has a memory of what actually happened on that day. The one that my favorite one is an old woman in her 90s who was taken to the elections in a wheelbarrow. And she was asked, "Who did you vote for?" And she smiled and said, "I won't tell you, but I voted for my smiling man." And that is how it was. All of us galvanized behind this democracy. We went on then to have our elections. We went on then to have one of the most well-spoken of constitutions in the world. We went on in that constitution to have 11 different languages declared as national languages. Because if you have so many languages, it doesn't make sense to choose only 2, because you've got all the others will be asking why not us. So we have 11 official languages in South Africa. The concentrations of those languages is different depending on where you are in the country. And the Constitution gives each province a responsibility to develop the languages that are common in the areas in which the province is located. That is through that story, it's the only way I thought I could describe for you the work of this foundation. The first one, looking after children. The second one, for the future leaders of the continent. And then, of course, the third one, focusing on the entire nature of the South African state. The biggest work that we do then is precisely to develop the template of negotiation that Nelson Mandela started, that is known for. We do a lot of dialogue work on some of the most intractable situations in the country. We know that when people as diverse as South Africans, with different histories, with different ambitions, come together, it is difficult to get them to agree together on anything. But we know then that we've got to start the work of putting the country together to achieve social cohesion through the difficulties of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we have had. And then to go on that if there are any difficulties that arise, we know that we like to bring people together who don't like to be together. and we have then to break that barrier. And it's hard because often you have to have enough time for people to quarrel and disagree, and then you have to have enough time for them to regroup and come back together. It takes a lot of work, but it's well worth it in the end. That is generally what we do within South Africa. We also work internationally with other countries. The last job that we have, the project we had, involved post-conflict countries, 11 of them, including Cambodia, South Africa, Kenya, Chile, Kenya, and other countries. The idea was, over a 3-year period, to bring together people who work in the field of memory, to develop a capacity, a knowledge of memory work together for over 3 years, meeting together and discussing the different memory projects of their individual countries. This project, Germany was the European country that was represented there. And the project was completed last July in Germany, in Berlin. And what a fantastic experience it was. So we see ourselves as working inside South Africa, within the continent of Africa, as well as globally, depending on the issues that are at stake. We also have one activity of the year is the annual Nelson Mandela Lecture, which we invite people of great stature around the world to bring to that lecture critical issues of a global nature to address them. We have had a great meeting among others. I'm not at liberty to speak about the next one, but you will certainly know when you hear. The work of in 2003, the organization has had 2 iterations. First was when Mandela left office. He established the organization to run his diary and everything. It was an impossible diary. But in 2003, he started what we called the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory, which is the major vehicle for driving his legacy. He passed away just over a year ago. The work of consolidating that legacy is underway. It is unfolding. We are all the time trying to find the best way of describing, capturing, and expressing that legacy. If you are able to visit the Nelson Mandela Foundation in Johannesburg, you will find there an extensive collection of his personal archives, his letters. I think you'll also find the certificates of the 31 universities in the United States that gave him the honorary doctorates when he was last year at Morehouse. So it's basically to keep all his work in one place, so that there are scholars from anywhere in the world, besides most of the things having been digitized, but you can also visit the foundation to have access. There is a replica of his prison cell in there, which will show you the kind of books that he read, including the biographies of South African prime ministers who would have treated him very badly while he was in jail, but it was his business to know what they think. And he did that methodically. So we are able to find all that in the foundation. That is what we generally do. We also succeeded in agreeing with the United Nations on the Nelson Mandela International Day, which is on the 18th of July every year. The whole world cooperates in observing that particular day. But the project around that, behind that, is every day must be a Mandela Day, that we do not wait only for that day. So we spend a lot of time making a Mandela every day a Mandela Day. And that pretty much sums up the unfolding work of the foundation. There's lots of other things that we do in the course of time. Let me conclude by saying that we think that when South Africa is running well, from the perspective of the foundation, we hope that South Africans will have a very deep and intimate knowledge of one another. When I grew up, for example, in the Johannesburg area, I'm Zulu speaking, but I spent 21 years in exile in Lesotho, where I came back speaking Sesotho and speaking much more fluent in Sesotho than in my original language. And when we grew up in the Johannesburg area, because there are all the confluences of cultures there, I spoke no less than 6 different languages. It is possible, therefore, we hope, that each and every South African has a responsibility to be able to speak at least 4 languages. Because the languages are so connected, it is possible for me, for you to speak Zulu, and I speak Xhosa. We have a running conversation. So it is possible to break those barriers through the languages that school kids have to learn. So I'd like to mention certain challenges that we have, because it's not rosy. The big challenge is that we talked about it, reference to was made in one of the talks this afternoon about structural injustice. It's deep in South Africa because it took 100 years of driven capitalism in South Africa to turn every black person into a worker. And then, as if that was not enough, the South African government decided that 13% of the land must be given to the vast majority of Africans, and the rest of the 87% for 5 million white people. To implement that took a great deal of suffering, of the mass movement of populations. More than 7 million people moved from different parts of the country to another. And some of the people that were moved came from thriving communities in agriculture and in business. They were taken away and dumped in land that was not usable. Now, many years later, where are all these people? They are there as South African citizens, but many of them don't have the means to make a decent livelihood. What about those who got the 87% of the land? They were supported by a very powerful economy, a powerful government, a powerful military force. The conditions that produce poverty and enormous wealth are still in place. And they do a lot, therefore, to interfere with the capacity to visualize a successful society. Because each time you think about the future of this society according to our constitution, you're faced with the prospect that it is all in your mind, but not in the reality of it. So how then to transform the South African economy to become an economy that empowers each and every South African remains work in progress. And for as long as that work in progress is underway, it has to draw from us all the best resources possible to create these dialogues that I mentioned, to make sure that we achieve a smooth and successful transition. Again, it's not going to be easy. I thought to mention this, that the challenge still remains, and the work of the foundation as formidable as ever. We hope to receive your continued support of the international community in the years that come. Again, it's not going to be easy, but it is worth the doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ndebele.